everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're on the final stretch of making Florin's outfit. We've already made the bloomers and we've already made the fur trimmed jacket, and today we're going to be making his fur trimmed hat, and we're going to be making his little shoes with the bells on them as well. So we'll be doing those together today. So if you go ahead and get your fabric pieces out that you'd had already, that you should have already cut out. And if you've not cut these out yet, then if you pop along to the first video for the jacket, then you'll then see that I've cut out all of the green felt pieces together, and that's because we don't want to get to the end of the project and want to cut out something and find out we've not got enough fabric. So therefore, whenever I start cutting any of the characters or their clothes out of a kit particularly, and you've got a limited amount of fabric, then we always cut that out at the beginning just to make sure that we've always got enough. So I'm going to start with the hat first, and then we're going to go on to the shoes. So to do the hat, you just need the one pattern piece, which is the hat here. And what I've done is I've added on 1/4 inch seam allowance onto this hat because I want to machine sew mine, just the way I prefer it. I've still got some fur left over, so I'm going to do the fur trim, which is correct as per the pattern. But I think I'm also going to have enough ribbon left, and I won't find a use for this little piece of ribbon otherwise. So whilst it's not in the instructions to add a little bit of ribbon on the top like we've got on his jacket, which is like this here, then I think I'm going to add it anyway because it's only going to not get used for something. So that's what I'm going to do. So if you just bear with me, let me just get everything together and we'll make a start. Okay, so the first thing to note is that on the hat, if I can just find, oh, here's my snips, we've actually got some notches to cut into our fabric just to remind us where things are. So we've just got 2 on either side, and that's for Florin's ears to poke out. So I'm just marking those with my snips by just making a little cut into the fabric at 90 degrees to the cut edge, and you just have to just go a couple of millimetres, and that'll be enough just to show you where that cut edge is when you start working with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is then identify which is my right side, and I'm just going to put a pin in just for now, just because so that I know I've got those pins on top there in case I get distracted. And rather than sew the fur on afterwards, I'm actually going to sew my fur on at the start because I think it'll anchor it down nicely. So I'm going to take my fur and I'm just going to run it along the edge of the hat, and then just by shunting my scissors through, I'm just going to shunt that through the fur pile really close to the mesh. Then I'm going to cut through this fur, and we've already cut through the fur already. So if this is your first garment you're jumping straight onto, then you just need to bear in mind that I've already shown you how to cut through fur in the past. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to line this fur up with the mesh edge against the bottom edge of the hat and pop a pin in just to hold that in place. And it's going to just fluff out slightly, but that's okay. So we're trying not to stretch the edge of the felt at all, and instead we're stretching, just if we can do, the edge of the fur, just to pin that in place along the edge. Oh, I cut off too much, look, that's a nuisance. Okay, so there's my fur pinned onto the edge of there. So let's go on to the other one, and if I'd not cut through that we would have had enough. So let's pin it first and then I'll see how much extra I need. So again, mesh edge onto the edge of the fur hat. Just fold the fur back so you can see where you're going, and then this will give me an end point to work to. Yeah, I'm going to need just a little bit, aren't I? So let's just get my seam gauge. I can use this pencil. And then we want 2.5 centimetres, or 1 inch, to be cut through a little bit more. And that will just give us enough just to get to the edge. I don't want to go too far because I want to preserve what we can of the fur just in case we want it for anything else. So I'm just cutting through the mesh, just parting the fibres of the actual fur itself with the blade of my scissors. And I have actually put up a little skill builder video on how to cut through faux fur, so if you need to refer to that, then please do. I'm just pinning from the other side, and then now we've got the edge of the hat, I can now just trim that fur off. Okay, there we go. Got me fluff everywhere, isn't there, again? So I'm going to use the zigzag stitch to attach that on the edge, because we know we can neaten the edge of that quite nicely, and then when we finish we're going to come again and we're going to put a zigzag across this edge. Now there will be some little tucks in this because the edge higher up here on the hat is shorter than the edge down here. Oh, here goes the fluff already on my face. So therefore there might be a little tuck that we need to make in the stitching just here when we get to it, but we'll do that if we need to. So let's put the spare fur out of the way, and I'm keeping my ribbon to one side because we're hoping to use that as well. Okay, so I'm ready to stitch. Let's put our machine onto a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to use a width I've used before of 2.5, and I'm going to use a stitch length of 2, and that's worked really nicely on the other stitching, so that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to just start on the edge here, and we're just going to, I'll do a couple of stitches back, although it will get edge caught in the seam as we sew it, but we'll be able to just pull that out like we did with the pin on the edges of the other stitches on his jacket. So let's find our way to the end, and then let me find my pedal, and then we'll be ready to go. And we just have to maybe pull slightly on the thread just to get this to stitch through, because the fur does make it a little bit tricky to get it to sew through. But we can also use the awl, which is our pointy tool, to fold the fur back out of the way so we can see where we are and just identify the edge of the fabric. Needle in your work when you stop to take your pins out. So that just holds everything nice and secure for you. The fur's just getting in the way there. And you've got a slight curve on that bottom hem, so just keep a little bit of pressure on the hat and you should be able to just manipulate it round. I've not needed to pivot just yet, so that is good. At the end, I'm just going to do a little reverse stitch at the end just to hold that in place. Okay, let's needle out of our work and let's take that one out. So when you first take these out, they do look a little bit messy on the edge. We'll take the pin out now, showing which is the right side because we've got that. So can you see on the edge there? It looks a bit messy, doesn't it? But we know from the jacket that we can use a pin to pull the fibres out of those stitches and it'll make it sit really nicely. Now you can see that we've got that edge here, and that's kind of wanting to stand proud. So when we stitch this, we're going to be moving some of that fullness. So I'll put a stitch in the middle, and let's put a stitch at each end. And that'll give us our reference points, won't it? And then when we go to the middle of each section, then we can just pull that out slightly and just split the excess between the before and after the next pin that you put in. And hopefully that should mean that when we go to stitch it, it'll lie quite nice and flat for us and not look like it's got a big pleat in it. So splitting that difference in the middle there. Okay, so let's now go back in again. I'm going to go from this side, I think. Keep the fur out the way while we're just stitching. Let's do a couple of stitches forward, needle in the work, a couple of stitches back, just to anchor that down. Pins out of the way. I need to move my pin cushion, don't I? And then using the awl, we can then fold the fur back so we can see what we're doing and just hold the edge down against the bed of the sewing machine while we're just getting close to it. And we'll stop and take our pins out and then move on a little bit more. And this time I am going to lift my presser foot up because I can see it's just flattening the fur down away from the being an equal hem. So I just want to keep that in place. So let's just use all the tricks we've got at our disposal to make this as lovely as possible. Now I'm just reversing just on that very edge again. So when we've finished, our hat is going to look, careful not to cut through your fur fibres when you're cutting off your ends. So that's how our hat looks at the moment. So we know that the next stage then would be to take our ribbon. So let me put a pin in to mark the halfway point on my ribbon to make sure I don't use over halfway on one side and then not have enough for the other. And if we don't have enough, I'll just not use it, so that's fine. So let me just pin this in place. I'm again covering the stitches up with the edge of the ribbon, just exactly the same way as we did with the jacket. But just make sure that because your seam is on a slant here, you've just got to make sure that you cover, you've got the edge of the ribbon goes off the felt, just marginally. Oh yeah, we're going to have enough. Okay, well I am going to have enough. I hope you have too. But just measure it first to make sure, and make sure that ribbon is going to cover all of your edge first. And when I pin this, I'm hoping it's not going to curve too much and cause me a problem, but hopefully not. I think it's gentle enough curve, we can get away with it. And again, you don't have to put the ribbon on if you don't want to do that. All you have to do is just go on and fluff your fur back up again. And by that, I just mean get a pin or your quick unpick point. And you just go through the fur and you just start to pick those fibres out, both above and below and in between those stitches. And you'll see that fur starts to pull out. And it starts to cover those stitches, that thread for you. Okay, just like that. So let's just finish putting this fur down. I have just had to take a drink of water, so have a drink of water with you or close by if you're working with this fur, because the little fibres do get into your throat. I mean, maybe it's because I'm talking so much. Maybe I ought to shush a bit. But if you're not talking, you might be okay. But there's that little fur trim on the hat. So I'm just going to now sew along the top edge of here and along the bottom there, the same as we have done with the jacket. I will change my threads to the dark grey because I prefer that dark grey thread against the ribbon. You don't need to see me do that. And then we're going to come back and we're going to fluff up this edge. Well, we might fluff up, I'll tell you what, we'll fluff up the edge at the end when we've finished, because we're going to do a lot of fluffing, aren't we? And then we'll take it up, and I think the ribbon is just about finishing where the notch is for the ear, so that'll be a good indicator for us, and then we'll carry on and his ears will just pop out. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and sew this ribbon on, same as we did for the jacket, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got my top thread changed. I've kept the green in for underneath because we might as well. There's not much going off with the greens, that's fine. And then I'm going to change my stitch back to the straight stitch, but we're top stitching. So I'm going to put it into the position for number 7 for my needle, so it's right across to the right. And I'm also going to take my stitch length up to 2.8 as well, so it just gives it that little bit more kind of feel to it, a little bit of a stronger stitch generally for top stitching. So let's take a couple of stitches forward, and I'll take my pin out because I was right on top of it, and put my pin in and just go backwards just to hold on to that edge. And I'm trying to do my top stitching so that I'm underneath each of the little dots that are on my ribbon. It depends what ribbon you've got on yours. And yes, you did just see me throw over a pin by accident. Try not to if you can, because you can put the timing of your machine out or break a needle if you don't quite get it. If it doesn't jump over the pin. Right, okay, so coming to the edge now. So I'm just going to stop in there, pivot, so I'll leave my needle in the work. I'm going to pivot up, take a couple of stitches up the side of the hat just to hold in, keep that in place, saves me breaking my thread. And now we've got to be careful again because we've got a bit of a loose edge here again, so we need to use the awl to hold that down as we're stitching so that it'll lie flat. We don't want any puckers in it if we can help it. But just by using the awl, you should hopefully be able to just get that to lie straight and flat. Again, trying to just miss those dots if we can with our stitches. And then I'm just reversing at the end just for a stitch, just to hold that down. We'll trim off the excess at the ends when we've actually sewn the sides up. So that's how that's looking now. All nice. And then we're going to fluff it up at the end, we said, didn't we? So I'll do the other one and then we'll be putting them together. The one thing that I didn't say earlier, but I'll have put a note on the screen to tell you, is when you're sewing your fur on, make sure you've got a right and a left. Make sure that when you put them together with the fur together, you've got the fur together. You've not got one going that way at the top and one going the other way, because that won't work for you. So if you'd put the pin in to show you the right side when you first took your pattern piece off, then you should be fine. But I just wanted to point that out in case yours isn't working for you quite right as to what might have gone wrong. Okay, I'm just going to sew my second one and I'll come back to you when we put it all together. Okay, so now we've got our ribbon sewn on and we've got our fur sewn on. We've got our rough edges still, but don't worry about that. We'll fluff it all up at the end. So now we're going to put those right sides together and we're going to find our notches and we're going to put a red pin in just to tell us to start and where we need to start and stop sewing, because we need to leave a little bit open for Florin to put his ears through. And mine is just falling just round about the top of the ribbon edge, but yours, if you've not used the ribbon, yours will be a little bit higher. So let's just put those in both sides. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down towards the fur, because I think it'll be easier to sew on the fur, onto the fur, rather than it will be to start here where it's bulky, because we'll have the rest of the stitches. So I'm actually going to start at the top here and then sew down on both sides, and I think that'll be much easier for us. So let's put a pin down the middle of the ears. Ears? What am I talking about? The middle of the hat. And I'm going to have my presser foot, so it's mostly on my fabric. So again, using the edge of my presser foot. So I've got my needle at position 7 for me, and then my edge of my presser foot is just going to be on the side of my fabric. And I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then put my needle in the work just to hold that down. And then we're straight onto the curve, so we're going to start and pivot a little bit, just to make sure that that's going to go through correctly. Because if you look at this, this is just too bulky just to start there, because you've got two lots of fur together. Take it nice and steady. Oh, we're coming to a wedge pin, remember, so we need to remember to get close to that. One more stitch, and take that one out, and now I'm going to reverse back. So that's got that held in place. I'm going to lift my needle and I'm going to jump to the position of the other red needle. I haven't cut my threads, because that'll help it just go through. And then I've got to take my other pin out, thread pin, when I'm on top of it, and I'm going to put my needle down into the work. I'm then going to use my awl and I'm going to sweep all of the fur fibres that are poking out over the edge of the hat and get as many of those going through and into the actual hat itself, because I believe that that will help it when we want to make the fur sit properly. You've just got to make sure you don't get rid of your mesh edges. I'll show you closer up what I'm doing in a minute. And then I'm going to sew now with a couple of reverse stitches. I'm onto my ribbon first, and then I'm going to sew up through the fur and then just reverse at the edge here. Well, because that's going to then hold the edge of the hat flat. So I do think that has worked well. So cut your threads, and before I just show you, I've tucked in that fur, look, just as I could. I'm going to take out the thread where I just jumped over the gap, and I'm just going to take off the threads at the top from where we started and stopped. Okay, so there's a little gap there for the ear. That bit's not sewn, but I started at the top and sewed down, and then I just jumped the gap with my threads starting across here, and I think that will then give us a nice fluffy edge to hide that seam. Okay, let's do the other side. So I've now turned the hat over so I can start at the point again and come down in the same way that I already have done. And we want to make sure we get this little curve at the top, so it's quite an acute angle we start on. So let's start and then just reverse and put our needle in the work, and then we'll start and pivot. You can hear my pedal squeaking, can't you? Sorry about that. I'm going to take the pin out from the middle because I don't think we need that anymore. And we're heading down towards the other red pin now. So to get close, let's just slow down a bit so we get right on it and take our pin out. And then I'm going to instantly hit the reverse button and then just go forward again, and that should hold that. So then needle out of the work, let's jump forward with our hat to the next pin. I haven't cut my threads. We just want to make sure the edges of the hat are together, and I'm going to use my awl again, and I'm just sweeping, just doing a sweeping motion. So pretend that this is the hat. I'm just using the end of the awl just to push those fibres of fur back in between the two pieces of felt to hold those in, so that can be as fluffy as possible on the edge. Take my pin out, put my needle in my work, and we're straight onto our reverse stitches just to hold that all in place, and then coming down to the bottom and then back to our reverse stitches again. Needle out of the work, and let's just cut our threads, and cut our threads where we jumped the hole again for the ears. And then cut our threads at the top up here. So at the top up here, we're going to have to do some snipping just to make sure that we've got a nice curve on this edge. So I'm going to take off the point of the hat at the top. So I'm going to cut it straight across. I haven't cut through any stitches. I'm just going straight across the felt that was the seam allowance. And now I'm going to trim a bit back here because this point here is going to get quite tight in there. And again on this side, I'm going to trim that quite tight to those stitches. So if I just show you that if I can, that's how tight I've got to my stitches. And then I'm just going to put a few little snips down the curved edge just to make sure that that's all going to sit right. So we're going to take some little snips out of the one that folds over because that fabric is going to be folding back on itself. You can use your pinking shears if you've got enough, but I can control this a little bit better with my snips. So just taking those little snips out of little triangles out, because that will help this all lie really nice and flat then. Okay, trim off any loose threads you've got. I can now trim off any loose bits of ribbon I've got that are on the edge to make that nice and neat. And then keep your fingers crossed. Let's turn this through and see how we get on. And I've found with the felt that you're better off to push than you are to pull, because the felt itself can be a bit delicate. If I use the end of the awl, I would use the end of the awl if I hadn't just dropped it. So let me just use the end of my quick unpick instead, and we can push that inside the hat to just pull all of that down and through, because the felt's quite thick, but if you just take your time, it should all just come through just nicely. Yeah, we're getting there. Then we get to the top just up here, we're going to need to use a pin. Oh, I've got fluff on my nose again. Just use a pin. Now just be careful, dig the pin in, but hold it tightly. You don't want it to flick out and into your face. But you can just then go towards the top, and we want to get that top out as much as possible. It's going to get quite tight in there, but you need a little bit of a curve, don't you, if you can. The more of the curve we can get, the better. And when you kind of see your stitches, you know you've got as far as you can. Just be careful that you don't pull too far and make it all fluffy on the end. But we've got quite a nice little snip there, haven't we? I might go back in and just take those little bits out. Yeah, so I'm going to just cut off. Can you see how the seam allowance is just poking out on the ear section? It's up to you. You can either just tuck it back in again when we've got it on his head, around his ears, or if you wanted to, because we've snipped into the felt anyway, just fold it out and you can just snip it off. No, I think I'll slip mine off and then you can see what I'm doing then, can't you? So that's one off. And there's the other side of that same piece to the notches, because the notches help it just fold out. Just take off, don't take off any more of the seam allowance, because otherwise you'll have too much of a hole. It's given quite a nice effect on the end, on the machine stitching has given a nice neat effect if you're not happy with your stitches. A little bit messy where it's joined up, but once we get the fur fluffed out, then we should be better. Okay, so now all that needs to be done, oh no, we've got another thing to do, but first let's just now use our quick unpick and go in between those stitches and just pull out all of that fur that we needed to do. So we just have to tease it out. You're not trying to go through your stitches or break your stitches, so just take your time and just do little pulls at it, and that should then neaten that edge off, because your stitches will disappear into the fluff of the fur. But you do just need to take some time just to get this going right for you. Once you get in a bit of a routine, it's not too bad, but it will release quite a lot of fur in to the atmosphere. So have your drink handy. So you've seen me do this before, so you don't need to see me do it again. So I'm just going to carry on doing mine and get all of that fur out from between the stitches. And then I'll come back to you, because the last thing we're going to do is we're going to sew a little bell onto the top just here. Okay, so now I've just pulled out the fluff around the edges, and I have just tried it on, but I do need to trim back the fur inside. So I'm going to just take my snips and take off the fur that is on the seam allowance inside, so that isn't getting in the way. So I have pulled out already the fur on the edge, look, on the join, so that's all nice and fluffed up and you can't really see that there's a join in the fabric. But this was just getting in the way when it's on his head. You could just see the fur on the edges. So I'm trying not to trim the green of the felt. I'm trying just to trim the pile of the fur, if you like, just to get that a little bit neater. Let's do the same on this side as well. So I'm just going in there, and again I'm not doing the edges of the ribbon because we don't want that to fray. It's just the bits of the fur that are in that seam allowance. And you can kind of hold the seam allowance to one side and then push the blades down, and the fur kind of jumps up into your blades. Okay. Try and make sure it doesn't go inside, because you'll be picking it out forever. So that just makes it a little bit nicer on the edge. So let me just take that a little bit off as well. That needs to come off. So just neaten it up however you see fit. It's worked very well, I think, machine sewing the hat. So I'm happy with that element of it. Just trying to take some of that fur bulk out, so that when, I mean, I've not got his, I'll fold his ears down at the moment just so you can see, but we just want that just to sit nicely on there, and then the ears will hold it in, but the fur was in the way at one stage. Okay, and it's got to go to one side. So the next thing then that we're going to do is we're going to get our haberdashery pack, and we're going to find our bell for going on the top of the hat. So let me just clear my table away and then I'll come back to you. So you've got a small amount, a few little bells in your pack, like this one here, and there's a little hole in the top where it can be attached. Now this one's not actually jingling, I don't know, it's obviously missed its little button inside, hasn't it, a little ball inside to make it jingle. And the other thing that you need to do with these as well, before you start to sew them on and get your needle ready, just make sure that your needle will pass through the top of the bell where you're going to be stitching it on, because otherwise you'll be having to find another needle. So you need quite a fine one, and one that doesn't bulge out at the top where the eye is. But hopefully you've got a needle like that in your stash anyway. So I'm just going to do a quilter's knot just at the top, just to hold that all in together. Oh, nose is still itching from the fur. and then we've taken the ends of the thread off just to hold that together. So I'm going to bury my knot inside, so I'm going to come up through the inside of my hat, perhaps through an ear hole, that might be easier maybe. And if you're just gentle, you can just kind of find your way through with your needle, because I want to bury that knot inside that very tippy point of the hat. And if you catch a little bit of the seam allowance of your thing at the end, it doesn't matter, just as long as you've got it nice and firm. And these little pieces for the bells and for the other haberdashery are why these are not intended as toys for children, because these little things are little choke risks, aren't they, for them, bless them, and we want to keep them all as safe as possible. So I'm just taking a little stitch through the hanger on the bell, and then through the top of the hat, and then through the hanger of the bell again. And as you start to take your stitches, the space where the little gap in the top of the bell is going to get tighter, so just do as many as you can, just so that you're happy that that bell is nicely secure. I'm probably doing about 7 or 8, aren't I? Stitches through, somebody will have counted. But there we've got our little bell on the top there. So then once I've finished, I'm going to just take a couple of stitches just through the felt only, not through the top of the through the hanger of the bell, just to kind of secure that thread. And then I'm going to take my thread back down inside the hat so that it gives us a nice long tail, because I think that then helps to hide your threads. So be careful when you're reaching back inside your hat. We can see it coming out there, look. But that's okay, because we can take it out through there, catching my thread at the same time. So down there, give us a nice long tail. Come out the side of your hat, pull on your needle, and then you can just take the threads off of there. And then those threads should just pop in again if you've put a little bit of pressure on your thread. So let's get Florin then, and let's try his hat on for him, shall we? You can decide whether you're going to the left or the right with his little dangly bit, his little bell, and then just poke his ears through one side. Oh, I've got the wrong ear in the wrong side, I think. There's one, there's the other. Okay, oh, he's not going to be able to see very well, is he? But there's his little ears poking out, and if you want to just tuck that felt in, just so that it's not going to look too odd because of the seam allowance. You can always trim it off a little bit more if you wanted to. But there's his little hat. How cute does that look? And just nicely neatly sewn down the side there, and the ribbon hasn't quite joined together just there as nice as I would like it. Just on this side, just here, look, a little bit messy there. Then you can obviously make a much better job of yours. This one's good, you can see on that side. But then just fluff your fur up, maybe out of his eyes, but you can see how nicely that edge has now been covered. Now we've pulled all that fur out through those stitches. That really is worth doing. And I can see there's a little bit just here where we can just do a little bit more, just to hide it a little bit more. Okay, but there he is, there's his lovely hat. So the next thing we need to do is make him some boots. Okay, so it's time now to start working on the boots. And if you remember, I added on seam allowance onto the outside of my template for the shoes, because I wanted to have a go at machine sewing those, just for those that who prefer that look. Obviously, if you don't want to machine sew yours, then you can just cut it out on the indicated line in the pattern and I just added on 1/4 inch, but take off that and then sew them round by hand. Just be aware there is a notch just there, and you'll need that notch, and just to mark that, because that's where your sole fits in underneath too, so you'll need that notch. And I've just noticed I've not got one on this other side, so let me just pop that on, and then that will make sure that I've got both the same, because we don't want odd feet for our character. That's that notch just there, so let me just put a little snip in there, and that'll just help me remember. And I have to say, this is the first time I've made these, so it may be that when I start to do them, we can do the first bit by machine, but then we have to actually sew the sole in by hand. I'm still hoping to be able to do it on the inside and turn it round, because that's the look I prefer, but if not, then we'll have to do it with a blanket stitch, or we'll use a zigzag stitch on the machine to try and do it, or we'll use another stitch. We'll make that bit up as we go along. So the first thing that I've then done, once I've sort of cut out my pattern and with the seam allowance on it, is I then made myself a template for a stitching line. So I've actually drawn a stitching line, because when you actually trace off this section here, you can't get right into that crevice just in there. So I needed to have a drawn line really to give me something to follow. There's no extra seam allowance on the top here because that's just open and that won't fray. And we also have our little notch down at the end just here, and I'll probably just put that a little bit on bigger on mine so that I can see. And I've drawn this on the wrong side of my felt so that I can see. And we'll be stitching down this section first, down to the bottom, or just 1/4 inch up I normally do, and reverse stitch there and reverse at the top. And then we'll start again here, reverse stitch there, come round here, pivot all the way around this curve here, and then we're going to stop at the notch again here, because we need to leave the bottom open so that we can insert the sole to get the shape that we want. So let's do this on the other one as well. So let me just mark that up on top there. I'm going to use pins just so everything doesn't move once I start to draw. And this is the thing with these sorts of characters and their clothes. There are different ways of doing things that you can adapt as and when you're ready to suit your own needs and requirements. Where's that notch? It's just there. So this is the way I'm doing it, as you'll know from sewing, and if you look at any other YouTube videos, which obviously I'd recommend that you do too, you'll see there's lots of different ways of doing things, and that's absolutely right because we're all different. But this is just the way that I'm going to do it today. So that's my 2 sets of shoes ready for being stitched. And then on my soles, I've got one there, and I'll draw one on the other side here as well. Oh, I'm just going to draw around it 1/4 inch, aren't I? I'm just going to freehand this one because I roughly know what 1/4 inch looks like after all of these characters and all the quilting I've done. But if you need to just measure and just put your little marks on the side and then join them together, like you've seen me do in other videos, then please feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in the middle there just to hold those together for now. I've got green thread in my machine, top and bottom. So let's have a go and let's see what we can actually achieve, shall we? Because Florin's waiting for his boots. So bless him, he's been very patient. So I'll just get my machine and switch that on. I'm going to move my needle across to the right so I can have my seam allowance against the edge of my foot. So the difference between my needle here and the edge of my presser foot there is my 1/4 inch. And I am going to sew this one first. So I'm going to start right on that bottom where that 1/4 inch is. And I'm going to reverse stitch. I've just got it all set up on a 2.2 stitch length at the moment. And I'm just pretty much following that line. Put the pin in because we just need to just come out slightly at the top. Let's take that off. So that's that first little bit sewn. And if you look, I've stopped there because that's where we're going to be inserting our sole, so we need to keep that open. And then let's have a go at this one here now. Just use that needle down function again, or you can use your hand crank to hand crank it shut. So we're now going to go down towards the toes. Just got to try and guesstimate roughly whereabouts the line is. And then we're doubling back on ourselves. So as you can see, I'm using that pivot function that I've used countless times before. Ooh, I lifted it up too soon then. And just go back. I've got my needle in my way. That's it. So it just catches me out sometimes when I'm concentrating too. Sorry for my squeaky foot pedal as well, if that's bugging you. I'm just going to reverse at the end. Okay. It's a little bit messy going around my curves, but do you know what? I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. So I've just sewn around here and then come round here and then round the outside there. So I'll do the other one in a minute. Let's just do one with you guys because that's all you need to see. So the first thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to be snipping into this corner here because we want to just take off a little bit of this excess seam allowance. We need some so that we can actually work and actually sort of make our characters, don't we? But I'm going to trim some of this off now into the corner. So I've cut through there, look, to make that flexible now so that it'll move out. And where this narrow bit is at the end, I'm just trimming off some of the seam allowance just to help that all lie nice and flat. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do then is take one of our soles. Let's put it in half. Oh, we've got a mark at the end there. And that's going to fit in up to there. So we're going to have a bit of a Y seam again. We've had these before when we're putting the bodies together, haven't we? Where we sew up to a point and then stop, and then it then stays that way for us. So let's just put this little sole inside. So far so good, I think. Oh, pins don't want to go through the felt. Just give them a twist if they don't want to go through, and just sort of tuck in any extra fabric that you've got in order to let that lie flat. I think I'm going to do this in two sections. I'm going to do this section first to the toe, then I'm going to stop, and then we'll do the other section. And I can pull that apart at the edge there just to make that fit nicely. Oops, lost a pin. Let's have a go just here. So again, I'm going to sew this, I think, from the top actually, because that's going to be easier. So I'm actually going to be sewing from the point because the sole can lie flat then, and I think that'll be that little bit easier. And I'm going to move my needle across now to the other side because that'll make it easier for me to be able to stitch and join up my stitches. And then we've not got so much on the main sole part of the shoe. That's round there. Needle in the work, and just change the angle slightly. It might work, which would be good if it did. Change the angle again. So we've got quite an oval shape on the bottom of these shoes, haven't we, that we need to try and copy if we can. Come down to the bottom at the back of the heel and just reverse. And take the threads off. So that's how that's looking on the bottom. And that's how it's looking on the top. So there's no puckers, that's good. So now let me go ahead and pin the other side. We might be able to do this, you know, it might work for us. Let's try and get that curvy bit at the end there in. And again back to the toe. And if you look, I've got my heads of my pins poking out, so then it doesn't matter whether I sew that way down or that way down. I can still access the heads of my pins very nicely and easily. And I'll just need one more pin. Okay, so we're sewing from the back heel here now. Just pull that out a little bit and all around to the front. So that's how it's kind of pinned, you can see. So nice and flat, no puckers on that sole, and that's going to give us this nice kind of curvy edge. We can always put a couple of extra stitches in at the back here by hand if we needed to, just to neaten it up. So just pull your back of the heel of your foot out, look for where your stitches ended. We can take a couple of stitches forward and back, and then our needle in our work. Take our first pin out. Just try to keep to that 1/4 inch seam allowance that we used. And come into the front, so I just want to make sure that all of the bulk of the toe is out of the way. our previous stitches and just reverse. Okay, let's have a little look. So that's what it's looking like on the bottom. So we have got the shape on the bottom quite nicely. That's all nice and oval. And then on the top here we've got our seam allowance, but that all looks okay. So the moment of truth is going to be turning this round, I think. And seeing how the actual toe pulls out. We don't want to stretch it too much at the top there. So just be careful how much you're pulling on that top edge. Use your finger where possible just to poke it through and just to ease it through. Going into this section here for the toe. Keep your fingers crossed for me, folks, please. It's one thing trying things in the privacy of your own home, isn't it? But another when you're doing it on camera. So just be very careful when we're pulling it out. Let me get a thicker pin. That's a better one. Just easing, oh, that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to kind of flick it if we can help it. Okay, so that's bottom of it. That shoe's looking nice. And now we've got to get this nice curvy toe out. So I'm just using my pin just carefully to just a little bit at a time. Little and often is better than one great big yank. That's what's going to upset it all otherwise, and it'll stretch your felt, or it could put a hole in your felt as well. And we haven't, while we've got some bits left, we're going to struggle to get a complete set of boots out of it, I think, if we tried to. So there's the point for the sole, where that is. Look, so the sole's looking nice, that's looking the right shape. So it's just this bit here now. Oops. Gently, gently. I'm glad there's no fur on these boots. Just trying to remember that shape and how it kind of folds back on itself. Still got quite a bit left inside. So we need to be pulling on the right section. Oops. Let's come in. Got to be really careful with this though, folks, because it is pulling slightly. Doesn't help that my fingers are very hot. So although we're doing Christmas in July, it is really warm here. We had 38 degrees the other day, and it's actually early 30s today as well. So a little bit cooler, would you believe, saying 32 degrees is cooler, but yeah, it's a bit cooler today, which is good. See, I've bent my pin completely. Come on. Oh, we're nearly there. You're holding your breath to make sure I don't make a hole in it just right at the very final moment. I think I am. I think we're nearly there. A little bit more coming out. And sometimes I like to try and do these things in real time, because I think that if I just go, and here it is, then you don't actually realise how much I've had to just take my time with things and fiddled, and then you start to doubt yourself if you think, well, she did it in 30 seconds flat, and you can tell that this is taking a good couple of minutes just to turn round. But I do like the effect of it being all hand stitched. That's all working out nicely. There we go. We have done it. So all we need to do now is just finger press these seams open at the back and at the front, because that's how that's all going to sit. And you could trim off some of the seam allowance if you wanted to. Let's try it on Florin and see how his foot goes in. New shoes time, Florin. Just manipulating his foot down into the boot. Yeah, that looks nice. It might need just a little bit of a press on that edge there just to make sure that's right. Let's look and see where the bells are supposed to go. Yeah, very happy with that. So yes, you can machine sew them, should you wish. And I think the end here is just the bulk of the felt. I think we're just about to the end of the toe piece. We need to be sure just before we sew on the bells, because otherwise they'll be in the wrong place. Oops. We have got a little bit more out of it. So you can get a good shape, a really good shape on there just by machine sewing anyway. It's just there, I'm just a little bit not so happy with the little turnout on the edge, and I'll probably trim the seam allowance back on that section. Let's have a look at our instructions and see whereabouts the bell goes. The bell goes on the back of the shoe and then on the toe of the shoe. So I'll trim that down and perhaps use my stitches just to hold it in place. Just taking the corners off. Make sure you don't snip through your character. That seems like that's okay. Right, okay, let's put some bells on that one then, and then I'm going to do the other one exactly the same. And then we'll be done with Florin's outfit completely. So there's one bell. Let's get there's two on Florin here. Okay, hand sewing needle and some thread. There we go, just going to do my thread double. Switch off my machine, it's making a humming noise. Right, 1, 2, 3, that'll do. And I've already checked that this needle will go through the little section on the bell, which is just at this point just here. So a little hole just there. So let's do his toe one first. Am I fully out with that? I keep finding a little bit more length on that toe piece. Just got to be careful, just edging it out. That's plenty. Right, okay. So I'm going to take a little bite of the felt first. And this thread's a really good match, which is great. And then we're going to find our bell. We're going to go through the little section on the back there, and then through the toe again. Just pressing down on the work surface if your felt's a bit stiff, and then I'm going to put 7 or 8 stitches through the little hanger of the bell. Threads wanting to get tangled up. Back through the felt again. And so I'm just going to repeat as I said, the other one exactly the same way, just so that one then shoe is made exactly the same way. And then I'm going to sew my bells on as well, just so that they can jingle jangle when he's around. So yeah, probably about 6 or 7 kind of stitches through. And then I'll go through a couple of times just the felt on its own, just to anchor that down. And then I'm going to put my needle back into the toe of the shoe. I mean, you could stuff the toe of the shoe if you wanted a little bit. You might well do that just to make sure it kind of keeps its shape. And then I'm going to just snip off that thread. So there's one bow on. One bell. section as well. Here's the other little bell. So let's put a little stitch at the back there. And take off any threads you've got at the end. Don't need those. Couple of stitches through. Oh, where's my belt one? Here it is. These are really tiny, aren't they? They're very easy to lose, so just be careful with those. And then I'm just going to do exactly the same way on here. Turn Florin over. Make sure you go through the hanger. So that's what's going to actually make sure it's connected onto the back of your shoe. I see I've missed it there, so yes, just do be careful. Just do it as many times as you feel you need. You know whether you've got children around that might want to pick them up and have a play with them, and therefore they probably need to be a little bit more secure on, whereas I haven't, so mine don't need to be quite so robust. But that said, I don't want them to be losing any while they're in storage. Okay, that's probably enough. So a couple more stitches. Just through the felt only, just to secure that end. And then I can travel down the back seam within the felt just to bury that end. Just go down to the bottom just there like that, look. And I like leaving long ends because I think they come unravelled less easily. And then snip that off. So let me just show you what his boot looks like. So that was pretty good, I think. I might well just put a little bit of stuffing just right in this section just here so that it kind of stays out. And I may well just iron that section just there, just because they're kind of supposed to splay out a bit. If we look at the original picture, they're supposed to splay out slightly. And that's the only difference really, I suppose, with not hand sewing it. You've got that little bit turned in. But in terms of fitting in, they fit well. Okay, so let me do the other one and then I'll come back to you and we'll round up. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the difference between the two shoes, because that one's got a little bit of stuffing in the top of it and that one's not got anything in. So I think I'm going to put some more in the other one just so that it makes it nice. Just got to make sure you don't interfere with his feet going along to the end of it and that it hits on his heel correctly, because you want those to sit in there nicely. There is a slight difference as well between the two curves on my shoes as well. Oh, I'm trying to get its right angle so you can see. And so it doesn't bother me because I think people will just look and see a bell on the end and it will be fine. But if you're an absolute perfectionist, you might want to just hand stitch round that bit just to get that right. And then what I'll have done is just got a little bit of the stuffing that I use for inside the bodies. Could use little offcuts of felt if you wanted to, but I wanted something that was fairly soft and malleable. And then I'm just going to use the blunt end of a knitting needle, just the head bit of the knitting needle, not the point, because you don't want to press too hard because you don't want anything that's going to go through and put a hole in your stuffing at all, in your felt at all. Just a little bit more, just so that they look even. You can just poke that in down at the bottom, and I can hear the little jingle from the bells as I'm just playing with the shoes. So that's just got that in there. So yeah, I think that gives it a nice shape. Don't need that bit, so let's put his toes back in again. And then pull the boot on up over his heel. And there we go. There you go, Florin, you've got your boots. Okay, let me turn the camera around and we'll just do a little bit of a roundup. So here's Florin in all his glory with his lovely jingly bells on his shoes, lovely bloomers, his jacket Andy's hat when that's sitting down nicely onto his head. He looks all dressed for the weather and completely at contrast to me, who's just sweltering here in Spain, but he's all ready now for Christmas, which is fabulous. So I'm really pleased that he's done. There's lots of work in these little outfits, and I know that they look a bit tricky, but hopefully I've broken it down for you into simple enough steps that you feel confident enough to have a go. And as I've hopefully shown you, it is all possible by machine, just by taking your time and not rushing it and enjoying the process really. But I think he looks absolutely adorable. So once again, I want to say a really big thank you to Angel Deos, who is the sponsor of the kit for the Festive Friends for me, and also therefore is sponsoring this tutorial. So I know that Anne is stitching along with me, so I hope you've enjoyed making Florin with me, Anne. And next we're on to Mary, and then we're going to be on to Père Hiver. I've got the fluff again all over my face. So yeah. Join me next time, should be in about a week's time I hope, when I'll be working on Mary's dress first and then on her wings and her halo. So happy stitching everybody, have a great day, and I'll speak to you all soon. Take care, bye.